All right, so today we're gonna dig into something, well, it's not the easiest thing to talk about, male loneliness,
Yeah.
but we're going for it. We're taking a deep dive into this piece, came out September 11th, this year, actually,
Okay.
and it really gets into, like, why this is such a huge deal right now. And look, if you're listening, guy, or, you care about any guys in your life, this one's for you.
It's interesting, we talk about loneliness as this big thing, but how it hits men
Hmm.
differently.
Right,
We kind of skip over that.
totally. Feels like we're finally, like, scratching the surface, though. Like, what's the deal with this whole strong, silent type thing,
Mm.
our source is saying? That whole traditional masculinity thing could be a big part of the problem.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it, right? Generations of men taught to just stuff their emotions down, be the strong one.
Don't cry.
Exactly. Never show weakness. That's ingrained, man.
Yeah.
Tough to break, even with all this new talk about mental health and being open.
Oh, absolutely.
Though, what's interesting? The source mentioned younger guys. They seem a bit more, I don't know, comfortable with being vulnerable. Maybe because they've grown up hearing about mental health more.
That makes sense, yeah. Like, we're making progress, but it's not like overnight everything changed, right?
Right.
But then on top of all that, our source, they bring up this whole other thing, how men are shown in the media.
Oh, yeah.
It's a mess.
Yeah, it's tricky. Because on one hand, we got to call out the bad stuff, right? The toxic masculinity, harassment, all that. But the piece makes this point. It's like some men, they feel like they're being lumped in with the bad guys just because they're dudes.
Yeah.
Like they can't win.
It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And constantly feeling misunderstood. Like, who would want to reach out then? Especially to women,
Sure. Like, why even bother kind of thing. Though, on the flip side, you got some men, they're using this whole thing to redefine what it means to be a man in a healthy way, building communities, shared values. But yeah, that feeling of being judged unfairly, definitely a factor.
It's like navigating a minefield out there.
Totally.
And you know what else feels like a minefield? This whole digital world, man. The source talks about how always being plugged in, yeah, it's convenient, but it could be making the whole connection thing worse.
And that's something we all deal with. But yeah, for guys already struggling with, opening up,
Yeah.
it's tough. Think about it. You're scrolling through whatever, social media. All you see is the perfect versions of everyone else's life. There was this study, UC Berkeley, found using social media is actually linked to feeling more lonely, more isolated.
Oh, no surprise there.
Right. And it gets to that thing of feeling like you don't measure up. That gets so amplified online.
Totally.
You start feeling inadequate, like you're failing because your life's not like that highlight reel. Makes you want to just retreat further.
Yeah.
And the piece is right. Online groups, they can be good to a point, but it's not the same as being face-to-face.
Not even close.
You can't replace real human connection.
Absolutely not. But as if all that wasn't enough, our source, they don't let us off easy. They bring up this other, like, huge thing nobody wants to talk about. Money problems.
Ah, right.
So many men dealing with this.
Yeah, you can't ignore that.
Yeah.
Cost of living. Through the roof. And the thing is, traditionally, men, they're supposed to be the providers, right?
Yeah.
Financially solid. So when you're barely making ends meet, trying to live up to that, even if it's out of your control, isolating.
Oh, for sure.
Think about it. You can't afford to go out with friends. Dating's expensive. Can't even do the things you enjoy.
Yeah.
Loneliness city.
It's like this perfect storm. Societal expectations, money stress, and then this digital world that's connecting us but also isolating us at the same time. No wonder so many guys are feeling lost.
It's true. And what's important to remember, it's not just feeling lonely. Like, there's real consequences to all this. Affects men's lives. Big time.
So we've, like, scratched the surface of where this loneliness thing comes from, but our source, they don't stop there. They get into, like, the consequences of it all, which it's kind of like a vicious cycle.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like,
Yeah.
one thing leads to another, and it just spirals.
Exactly. And one of the first things they hit on is this whole emotional suppression thing. It's like, even when guys start to realize, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable, something holds them back.
Totally. It's like those expectations we talked about. They run deep, man.
Yeah.
It's not easy to just flip a switch and suddenly you're like an open book.
Right.
There's this study by the American Psychological Association found that men way less likely than women to seek help for mental health stuff. And a lot of it's that fear of looking weak. It's especially in front of other guys.
That's huge. And it kind of makes what the source said about men feeling stuck in routines make more sense. Like they're going through the motions, but without those deeper connections with people.
It's not that they don't want those connections.
Yeah.
Imagine like how much courage it takes to be vulnerable, to put yourself out there emotionally when you've been told your whole life that's not what men do.
Makes you think, you know, there's this book I read a while back, The Mask of Masculinity. The author talked about how for a lot of men, showing emotion, it's like this huge risk.
Oh, yeah.
They feel like they're putting on a performance, and if they mess it up, judgment, rejection.
Exactly. And that fear of judgment, it ties into the next thing our source brings up, this risk aversion. And it's not just about romantic relationships, it's any kind of connection.
Yeah.
With all the talk about toxic masculinity, some guys might not even try to make new friends just because they're terrified of being misunderstood or
Yeah.
judged.
Walking on eggshells all the time.
Right. And the source pointed out it plays out in different ways. Some guys, they get more withdrawn, while others, it's like they overcompensate, trying way too hard to prove they're not the
It's
problem.
exhausting.
Totally. It's like this constant pressure to manage how everyone sees you on top of everything else. And then, of course, we've got social media and that whole hustle culture thing adding fuel to the fire. Our source, they connect those to this achievement comparison thing. Like if you're not constantly grinding, achieving, showing off your successes, are you even really living?
Which is totally unsustainable. It's like you're on this treadmill, always comparing yourself to everyone else's highlight reel. There was this study found that men who use social media mostly to compare themselves to others, much more likely to have, like, depression and anxiety.
It's like we're programmed to look outward for validation instead of finding it in ourselves. Makes you wonder, how do we break free from that?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's tough because so many of these things, they're all tangled up together. Like, remember the economic pressure we talked about? The source makes this great point, tying that back in. Yeah, it's not just about comparing yourself, it's about basic survival too. If you're already stressed about money, feeling like you're behind, then add on the pressure of dating, where it's still kind of expected for the guy to pay.
It's just a recipe for feeling totally inadequate. Like you can't afford to do anything social. You're always comparing yourself to others. And then there's society's expectations on top of it all. No wonder some guys just shut down.
It's rough, honestly. But you know, what I like about our source is they don't leave us hanging. They talk about their own experience with all this and their approach. It's kind of fascinating. They talk about creating what they call subpersonalities.
Yeah, that caught my attention too. Definitely a unique way to look at it.
So these subpersonalities, tell me more about that. It's like compartmentalizing or something.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The author, he describes these two sides of himself. Bannock, this like vulnerable leader type, and then Devon, more the stoic follower.
Oh.
It's almost like he's created these internal characters to handle different situations.
Internal characters. I like that. Like those classic archetypes you see in stories, but applied to his own life.
Right.
So is that like healthy or is it more just avoiding the real issue?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's definitely an interesting way to deal with all that pressure we talked about. But makes you wonder, can you really separate things like that
Yeah.
without it, I don't know, bubbling up eventually?
Yeah. It's like instead of trying to fit into these boxes, Bannock for this, Devon for that, what if you just focused on being like you, the real deal, messy and all, and finding people who are cool with that?
Now you're talking. That whole authenticity thing, that's powerful.
Mhm.
It's realizing being vulnerable isn't weak. It's what lets us connect with people for
Mhm.
real. And honestly, that's not just for men, that's for everyone.
For sure. It's like we're taught we got to have it all figured out, be these perfect versions of ourselves. But maybe the real strength is being okay with not being perfect, letting yourself be vulnerable.
Absolutely. And, it all comes back to that idea of connection being the answer to loneliness.
Yeah.
When we can just be ourselves, no acts, no pressure, that's when real connection happens.
Exactly. Finding your people, the ones who get you, who you can just be yourself around.
Totally. Building those bridges, understanding each other, understanding ourselves. We don't have to go through this alone.
So well said. And hey, huge thanks to everyone who joined us for this deep dive into male loneliness. It's something we don't talk about enough, and hopefully this got you thinking, maybe even spark some conversations with the guys in your life. And remember, you're not alone in this. Reach out, check in on each other, and let's keep talking about this stuff. Until next time, everybody.